All right, well, thank you all for attending this afternoon. I'm going to kind of review what we do at the Regional Science Consortium in terms of water monitoring. So this is one of our most important priority projects that we have each year. And we've been working on E. coli monitoring for over 11 years now. We do this in coordination with many other organizations, including the Erie County Department of Health and Pennsylvania DCNR, to get the water samples collected and processed and kind of comparing data between our different labs. So the RSC looks at bacterial concentrations in the swimming waters, but we also look at waters that extend not only on Presque Isle swimming beaches, but also around Presque Isle Bay and from the shoreline of Pennsylvania from Ohio to New York. So we collect water samples and we process them for E. coli and Bacteroides. Both of these are bacteria that you would find in the guts of warm-blooded vertebrate animals. So we see this as an indicator of human waste in the water. This year we collected samples from May 24th through September 3rd, and we do this daily. So according to the Beaches Act, we're mandated to collect water samples at swimming beaches once a week. And our health department does it twice a week, and then we do it 7 days a week, and we're able to compare that data between each other. So when we sample, we have kind of a different sampling regime than the health department. They take many more samples than we do. We collect at 6 different zones on Presque Isle State Park, and that bottom map right there, you can see those red dots as those different zones. And we selected these zones after a lot of discussion with our E. coli task force and when Harry Leslie was still with DCNR. And these are different zones along the peninsula where the water just interacts differently. So the water might be coming in one zone, it might be kind of moving or have a different velocity or flow in a second zone. And so we can have representative samples at each of these different zones. You will see zone 6 is kind of looks like it's out of order. And that's, and zone 1 is a little bit cut off, I think. But zone 6 actually correlates on beach 2, and that lines up with our weather station that we have there, as well as our water quality buoy. So we're able to collect a lot of this information at one location. Around Presque Isle Bay, we have 12 sites around the perimeter. In those sites, we actually started this project about 12 years ago, and that's when we only had a couple sampling days at less than 6 sites. So we have upgraded that Presque Isle Bay study to doing it once a week, and we're looking at 12 sites around the interior of the bay, and that's that top map that you see with the yellow pins in it. So for this project, we've collected over 3,000 water samples that we processed just for Presque Isle beaches. And then we had processed an additional 1,400 water samples around Presque Isle Bay and Lake Erie shoreline. So we use a couple different methods when we analyze these water samples. The most important one is plating. So we actually use a vacuum filtration method. We adhere to the standard methods outlined by the EPA. And we filter that water. We take that filter paper, put it on a petri dish, and then grow those bacteria into colonies. And this takes about 22 to 24 hours for the entire process. So there is a lag time there, and EPA recognizes that. So if we collect samples water samples on a Monday, then we're getting the results on Tuesday and issuing that information on Tuesday. So in a sense, it is slightly flawed. However, you also have to remember that this process is affordable and many people can do it. And if you think of all the beaches across our country, that this is a good way to realistically implement this monitoring. Excuse me. So because of that, we have also over the years, and it started with Geology money several years ago, implemented predictive models. And predictive models give us day-of results. So these predictive models, the first one is RoboHarry, and this was a collaboration with Mike Rudder from Penn State Behrend, as well as some other organizations. And what we looked at is if we can look at all the real-time data from weather stations, buoys, flow gauges, all of these real-time data sets that are out there, we can actually pull this data, put it into a predictive model, and come up with the idea of not exactly what the plate counts are, but if they are exceeding an advisory level or a restriction level for swimming beaches. We also have another predictive model we work with the U.S. Geological Survey on. It's called Nowcast, or Virtual Beach, and this is implemented all through the state of Ohio. They've done a tremendous amount of work on this, and also implementing it in many beaches along Lake Erie, as well as in the interior of Ohio. And this every model is a little bit different depending on the exact geographic location that you're modeling. So some of the most important parameters in these models are wave height, turbidity, lake levels, and it determines, again, good or poor water quality. So it's determining that category of what the water quality is. Nowcast is a little bit different because you actually need some boots on the ground. So you need technicians to go out and collect the water samples, bring them back in, and then just take a couple quick measurements, whether that's temperature or turbidity readings, enter that into the formula, and then it'll give you results. So I also mentioned that we utilize real-time data. We have 2 buoys that we put out on the lake. The picture that you see there is our nearshore buoy off of the peninsula, off of the lighthouse. It's in about 50 feet of water. It's about 2 miles off of the peninsula and within 5 miles of the shoreline. We have another buoy that's over at Walnut Creek area, and then we have 2 smaller beach buoys that we've had for, the first one we had was about 10 years ago, and those buoys are monitoring things to do with the water quality, such as temperature, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, pH, conductivity. And then we have 2 weather stations, and one weather station is on beach 2, right on the dune line, and then we have the second one right on top of us, on top of the truck tower. So all of these things are collecting data on these parameters every 20 minutes, and so it's a very large data set. If you go back to actually when this building opened in 2006, the weather station was on top of the tower and also on beach 2. We have another piece of equipment we use called a green light analyzer. This is a piece of equipment where we put the water sample in, we add some nutrients, and the bacteria within the water sample will respire, and that respiration rate will determine kind of how much bacteria, but it's very general, so it's not targeting just E. coli, but that you have a lot of bacteria or not a lot of bacteria in a sample. And we've been collecting data on that for a couple years, and that will be something that we can add to our data set or our predictive models. Previous studies, we've also looked at qPCR, so trying to get more of those day of results, quicker results. We look at the DNA. The good and bad of that story is that we didn't always get really great results because we never had a lot of high contamination days. So the good news is the beaches here, we do not see very high contaminations where we have restrictions on our swimming beaches. So that's the good news. Bad news is it's hard to model that with qPCR, and there's some other roadblocks with that technique as well. In addition, we've also been working on another research project looking at the E. coli in the sand. So if we have a restriction on the beach, it means that it's not a closure. You can still go on the beach. You can still be on the sand. However, we find that in certain instances, sand does harbor E. coli. Sometimes having more E. coli in the sand than you do in the water. That's something that's much more difficult to model, and trying to figure out what that scenario is something that we're still looking into. So some of our results, we actually are still in our field season, believe it or not. I think we had snow last weekend, and we're still out there collecting water. So we don't have results that I can show you in kind of a graph form yet, but I will at the next meeting, so stay tuned. So our daily results, when we do get them back, you'll see the plates at the top of the page. That's what we're counting as those colonies after 24 hours. And so you can see each of those colonies represent one bacterium. If we have 235 of these colonies forming for 100 milliliters of water, we need to issue a beach advisory. And over 999 colonies, we would issue a beach restriction. At the consortium, we do the science. We pass this on to our DCNR managers. And so we give them the results in a daily email. We tell them what these plate counts are. We tell them what the robo-hairy prediction is and the virtual beach prediction is. Again, our year is very typical to previous years in the number of advisories and restrictions, very limited numbers of both. Again, I think we might have had one restriction this year. And some of you noticed that Beach 11 had some issues toward the end of the season, and that can be from many different things, including how the water is flowing or not flowing, if it's very stagnant, if you have bird populations there, or even if you have dredging activities going on in the channel there. So a lot of those things play into it, and we try to make those points when we talk about different advisory or restriction occurrences. So when the RSC tests this and reads their plates, DCNR will issue it as a precautionary advisory or precautionary restriction. The regulatory end of it is done by the health department, and so when those plate counts are exceeding the advisory restriction, then they would just be termed an advisory or restriction. And then we report all this to the health department, and they report it as a large data set to the EPA. So moving on to HABs, harmful algal blooms is actually a cyanobacteria, so we're still talking about bacteria. We do this testing once a week. We do it at 28 sites, and this includes the Presque Isle beaches, around the perimeter of Presque Isle Bay, but we also do along the Lake Erie shoreline from Elk Creek all the way to Freeport out in the northeast. So we cover pretty much the whole shoreline with our different sampling sites. We start in May, and we continue until October 24th, so Thursday will be our last sampling day. And the photos that I'm showing you are local photos from this season. So you can see that top photo is the ferry slip. The middle photo is from the bay side of the peninsula. And then the photo on the right is down at the marina. So this green coloration that's on the water is something that we saw this season. Again, those are our sampling sites. So in addition to the ones that you see marked on the map, we have also added Horseshoe Pond, Leo's Landing, the Lagoon Boat Launch, Summerhaven, and Niagara Boat Launch. Around the lake side, we have our 6 sampling zones, so the same sites we sample for E. coli, but we've also added Boaters Beach, which is right adjacent to Beach 11, Lawrence Park Boat Launch, Shades Beach, Freeport Beach, Walnut Creek, Avonia, and Elk Creek. And after one of these meetings last year, somebody made the suggestion of adding in Shades Beach, and so we did do that this year. And we're glad we did, because we did see exceedances over on the east side of that location. We also sample, or we receive samples from Erie Waterworks and Northeast Waterworks, or their drinking water facility, so we monitor that as well. I also want to add that Erie Waterworks sends it to a different lab in Cleveland several days a week, and they send it to us once a week, so they're getting a very good comprehensive view of what type of contaminants, if any, in terms of harmful algal blooms are in their water. And they've had no issues at all. They wanted to make sure that was stated. So we bring these water samples back. We run an ELISA test on it. The ELISA test is looking for the production of toxins, so it's measuring that concentration of toxins. We have 4 different toxins that we look at. Microcystin is the most popular or common one. We do this one once a week. The anatoxin A, we look at this 2 times a month. Saxitoxin and cylinder spermopsin, we do this 1 time a month as well. Part of this is that the tests are expensive, and they do take some time. We can do it all in one day, but it's a full 10-hour day for my team, so we try to do as much as we can and as effectively as we can. And we also do visual monitoring. So if lifeguards or DCNR staff see that there is an issue, we can go out, we can collect samples, we can bring it back, we can look at it under the microscope, identify the cells, and say that there might be a potential for this type of toxin to be produced. And then we sample. We usually do the samples every Thursday. And so then we make a note of that, and if we have to include an additional site on that Thursday sampling, we can. So those results are sent to in an email, weekly email to DCNR managers, as well as Erie County Department of Health. And at those sampling sites, if there is an exceedance, then they will have signs posted, such as the one you see here. This one is saying that we've exceeded a dog threshold. If we exceed, a human advisory or a human restriction threshold, we have a different sign for that. That also includes the dog, but it has 2 humans as well in there. So for the microsystem thresholds, you can see we have a dog guidance value, drinking water for children, drinking water for adults, recreational advisory, recreational restriction. In 2017, we really did not see any recreational advisories or restrictions. However, this year we did see a handful of those. How has this season changed from last season? It can have a lot to do with weather patterns, temperatures, as well as nutrients going in the water and what nutrients are available for these blooms to take up and also to produce the toxins. We do see the dog guidance value exceeded nearly every week, so that is something that is exceeded. And just to touch on that real quick, the reason we do post this is because going to national conferences that people, have talks on, there are fatalities for dogs, so if a dog interacts with this water, it can be within 2 hours that they go into seizures and death. So a lot of times people are reporting this as before they can even get their dog to the vet. And there's also misdiagnosis by veterinarians that these are due to like epilepsy or just some old age seizure issue. And so we just found out today from CCM that we've been funded for next year or this year to work with veterinarians on this issue and to get a better idea of dog illnesses that are directly related to a HAB toxin, cyanotoxin poisoning. So exceedances this year have occurred every week we sampled. We had, I would say, at least 3 to 6 and even more than that. So remember, we sampled at 28 locations. So at least a half a dozen every week we've had exceedances at some level, so at the dog level typically. We started sampling in the month of May. Typically, it has been reported that HABs are common in July through October because the water has warmed up enough to allow those blooms to occur. However, the very first day we sampled in May, we had several exceedances. So that's kind of a timeline is moving up a little bit. We did exceed the recreational threshold this year, so that's something to take note of, that it was a little bit higher and a little bit longer of a duration. Exceedances occurred for 3 of the 4 toxin, including microcystin, anatoxin A, and saxitoxin. Last year in 2017, saxitoxin was detected, however did not exceed a threshold. This year we had saxitoxin exceed a threshold at several locations. This one is concerning because we only sample it once a month, so we're only catching it, on that specific day that we sampled. Saxitoxin is one of the most toxic toxins there is. So this is something, it's related to when you see on the ocean beaches where you can't eat the shellfish because of the paralytic shellfish poisoning, and where fish can wash up on shore. This is the toxin that's doing that, so we don't want to see that here, but we want to evaluate how we monitor it next year and see if we can do it a little more frequently. And we did not see any exceedances for the cylinder spermopsin last year or this year. Additional research that we're doing on these topics, this season alone we sampled over 7,000 water samples. That's a lot of water. So again, I want to acknowledge my team for good work this year. For the harmful algal blooms, we have worked with flow cytometry. We were able to get this piece of equipment thanks to a Sea Grant last year. And this flow cytometry allows us to count the cells in a water sample, so we can count the cyanobacteria cells and then relate that to the toxins that we get from the ELISA testing. We also are working with U.S. Geological Survey to do predictive models on Beach 6, and working with Wilkes University on the other side of the state to look at DNA population analysis. So we take a water sample and we see what are all the different cyanobacteria and other bacteria in that water sample, and how those different populations change in response to one population being elevated. Sometimes the other one will decrease or vice versa. And then we are also having nutrient analysis conducted on our water samples. We do that in a very quick method in the RSC labs, and then we have USGS sending it out to their labs for a more detailed description. Our E. coli studies, we are continuing to do that base study. I mentioned our sand, and then we are hoping to get funding for microbial source tracking. That'll allow us to look at bacteria that's impacting the peninsula and trace it back to the location that it's coming from. So it's almost looking at a fingerprint on that E. coli and scaling it back from where the source is and where it's coming from. So hopefully then we can work with DEP and the Department of Health to maybe rectify some of those sources that are impacting our beaches.
So we're going to move on to the next item. Dr. Sean Rafferty from Pennsylvania Sea Grant is going to come up and show you all about a brand new website that's available for Erie County as well as the world. It's called the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Water and Land Technical Resource website. Okay.
It's the world, man.
Everybody can access this.
Can everyone hear me? All right, I don't need to stand behind here. Is that okay? I'm more comfortable out here. My name is Sean Rafferty. I'm the Research Director and Associate Director at the Pennsylvania Sea Grant College Program. I'm located here in the Erie office. Our program has a staff of about 13 individuals that work across the Commonwealth. So we have staff in the Lake Erie region, the Susquehanna River region, and the Delaware River region. And today I want to be talking about a collaborative project between the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection, Pennsylvania Sea Grant, and also Penn State Behrend, faculty, students, and IT staff. A little disclaimer, I am not a web developer, so this presentation is not meant to be technical. Are there any web developers in here? Good. Ed, yeah, I forgot about you. No technical questions, Ed. So I'm more going to give you a preview of what this website, the Water and Land Technical Resources website, looks like, and then I want to spend a little more time on an actual web mapping application that we developed. Anybody that knows Tim Bruno, he loves acronyms, so Walter is his thing. I'm not that creative. So I'll provide a little background, so the genesis of the project. I'll then provide a brief overview of the website itself. So you can go to pawalter.psu.edu. The site is live. This is a current project, kind of a living project. We're continually updating and fixing things. And then the last thing I'll do is provide an overview of the actual web mapping application. And this will include the functions of the application and then some of the data sets that are available through the application. So is anyone in here not familiar with the Great Lakes Area Concern Program? Don't be afraid to raise your hand. Okay, everybody is great. So I won't go through that. You need a little history or you're okay? Okay. Because that'll add an extra 10 minutes to the presentation, so it's up to you.
No need.
Okay, great. So in 1991, Presque Isle Bay became the 43rd and final Great Lakes Area Concern listed under the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. What was unique with the Presque Isle Bay AOC was it was listed at the request of the citizens of the community. And around the same time that the AOC was listed, a group formed, the Presque Isle Bay Public Advisory Committee. Do we have some members in the audience? Great, so the PAC kind of morphed into what we are now, the PA LEEF meeting group. So the goal of the PAC and why it was set up was to advise the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection on issues related to the AOC. In 2013, Presque Isle Bay was delisted as an area of concern. And as a result of that, in 2014, the Presque Isle Bay Public Advisory Committee dissolved. But before they dissolved, we had a brainstorming session. So the PAC wanted to ensure that there was transparency, was key moving forward. So they wanted access to the data, the science that was happening in the AOC and the Lake Erie region. And one of the things that came out from that brainstorming exercise was this idea of a one-stop base web center. So that's kind of the genesis of Walter and where this project came from. Also at the same time that the AOC was being delisted, my colleagues and I were working on a watershed plan for the Pennsylvania Lake Erie watershed. And kind of the goal of this project was to provide integrated water resources all in one document that could be used by natural resource managers to guide restoration and conservation in the watershed. And so one of the things that came out of that project, well, there's several, the one I'll focus on today was an inventory of data that was available. And so that's where the idea of the web mapping application grew from. So if you're interested in that report, I'd be happy to talk to you about it, but you can also download it at the Sea Grant website or on PA Walter. So the Pennsylvania Lake Erie watershed, those that work in this area know it's a 508 square mile watershed. 33 municipalities covering 2 counties. There's approximately 56 streams, approximately 1,121 miles of streams within the watershed. So this was the area that was the focus of Walter in the subsequent web mapping application. So this is Walter. So when you go to pawalter.psu.edu, this will be your landing page. So what you'll see is kind of this carousel. So this is designed to give announcements of upcoming meetings or projects or reports that are coming out. So you can see the Pennsylvania Lake Erie Environmental Forum meeting on there. And then the site's really broken into 4 portals. So you have a topics page, a project toolkit. This area is under development currently. So this will guide people interested in land development and land and water resources through a series of questions and steps to try to get more information on that project. So that's under development. We also have the geospatial portal and then the resources. So the topics page, you can click on the topics, it takes you to another landing page. So these 9 topics were identified by the Department of Environmental Protection and Sea Grant as being priority issues for our region. So you have agriculture, bluff management, water quality, invasive species, some of the typical issues that we address in the basin. And what you can do is you can click on these topics and it'll take you to a separate page. So it provides an overview of what that issue is. For example, bluff management. What is the issue for Pennsylvania? Then it also goes through news and initiatives. So what's happening around the Great Lakes and Pennsylvania to address bluff management. And then the last thing we did was tie in the resources. So when you go to these topic pages, all the resources for that topic are tied in there. I would take you to the site, but I don't trust technology and working and going to the site, so I have all screen captured here, so I apologize. The next section I'd like to discuss is the resources platform. So you can click on that. And what it does is take you to the resources section. And this is one of the big things that the Presque Isle PAC was interested in. They wanted to make sure all that historical information, the research, everything was archived. So that's what we're doing here. We're providing resources. So we have it broken down by topic and resource type, so that's all searchable. If you only want documents associated with water quality, you can do that. We also provide the date, so you get an idea of when the study was. And again, this is a growing and a living website, so we have lots of more documents to add. So there, this just shows you that you can go up there, you can click on the topics, the resource type, and what it does is just spit out all the documents related to that focus area or focus topic and the resource type. Okay, so the geospatial portal. So you click on that, you'll land on the geospatial landing page. And currently we have 2 options. You can click on maps or data. So the map section is where the web mapping application comes into play. So this site, we try to not only include the data that we include in the Lake Erie watershed, but also other mapping applications that our partners have developed. So you go to this page, you can see there's, this site was developed by the DEP. This gives users an idea of the MS4 requirements within their community. We have an invasive mussel monitoring map, and this is developed by the Sea Grant program to track quagga and zebra mussel infestations across the Commonwealth. PA Conserved Lands, this was developed by the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources. And this is a great site, it shows all the conserved lands and properties within the Commonwealth. Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission, several web map applications there. The watershed restoration application, so this provides the data that was used in the development of the Presque Isle Bay watershed plan that was developed in 2010. And the last thing we added, and Dr. Schnars talked about the HAB and E.coli monitoring. So the Regional Science Consortium and the Health Department produced this awesome map that gives users updates on the advisories and the E. coli and harmful algal bloom levels. within the bay and the swimming beaches. So what I'm going to focus on today is PA Walter. So this is my only technical slide I have, so bear with me. But GIS, so GIS stands for Geographic Information System. Sometimes we get locked into thinking GIS is simply a map. But what GIS really is a system. So it's a system of people combined with software and technology, and then an end product. So that's really what the system is. It's the people, it's the software, the hardware, and then the end product. So this site was developed using a couple of applications. So the map, the actual base map you'll see is created in ArcGIS Desktop. Any GIS users in the room? There's a few. Okay, the good thing about the web mapping application is you don't have to know anything about GIS to actually log on and use it. That was the whole idea behind it. So I created all the base maps in ArcGIS Desktop, so you can make all the symbols the way you want it, you can label layers the way you want it. That's all done in Desktop. And then what we use is a new product called ArcGIS. I guess it's not new anymore, but ArcGIS Enterprise software, and that's where you actually create the web mapping application. So that's where you connect the desktop with the web world. So when you go in there, there's actually options, there's themes. They're already developed web themes that you can just pick. You can also just easily upload your map. So whatever I develop on the desktop, I just simply put it into the cloud. And so Penn State Behrend has its own enterprise portal. And then you can choose what widgets you want. So what functionality do you want the map to have? So we'll go into the site. So this is PA Walter. So when you enter it, there's this disclaimer here telling the user where the data comes from, and that Penn State is not liable for the accuracy of the data. So you can't come back and sue Penn State for this. So you just click I agree, okay, you can enter. And so down the left-hand column of the web mapping application, you'll see the operational layers. So you can click on the drop-down arrow, and that'll take you to all the themes. So we have natural resource data, we have coastal development data, we have point source data, water use data, recreation data, tons of data in this website. And so you can further click on these themes, and it pulls up all kinds of other data. So this is the example of the ecological data. What we did for that was take a look at the historical reports and convert it from a static paper report to a geospatial layer. You can also just look at a legend, so if you don't want to see all this information, you can just look at a legend. So you can see the streams and the watershed boundary is highlighted now. And then the nice thing is too, is there's this print function. So if you just wanted a map of the watershed and the streams, you can simply export this map and use it however you want. The other thing is you have the option of changing your base layers. So if you want imagery, a different topographic map, different street maps, the options are there. And so some of the functions of the website, we included a search function. So you can search for a point on the map, either use an address, or you can actually use XY coordinates. Also zoom in, zoom out function. This button here will take you back to the home extent in case you zoom out too far or zoom in too far. We also provide coordinates, so if you just simply want to get a coordinate, you can read that off the map. There's also this analysis toolbox. We don't have any tools in it yet, but we put it in there in case in the future we want to add something. You can measure, so you can measure distance on the map, you can measure area, and then also you can do a drawing tool. So if you kind of want to create your own drawing on top of the map and then export it, you're able to do that. And you don't have to have GIS software to use this. You don't have to have any knowledge of ArcGIS to use this. And so the last thing I wanted to mention is the data. We're still working out a good way to make all the data easily accessible for folks that actually want to use it in an ArcGIS environment. So you can click on the data, and right now it takes you to a page where it provides what we call metadata for all the data that was involved. And on top there you have options. So any Google Earth users here? There's a few. So you can actually download a KMZ file and just open this entire map in Google Earth if you're more familiar with that. If you're an ArcGIS desktop user like myself, you can save it as an ArcMap file. You can actually open the data into your own map and do whatever you want with it. So some of the data that's available through the site, so we have natural resource data, we have a stream file, so this was recently delineated by our vendor Wolpert, and what they did was use high resolution elevation data to delineate the hydrography and the hydrology in the watershed for us. Contours, we have watershed boundaries, forest covers, slope, imagery, digital elevation models. We also have some coastal development data. One of the things I'll point out here is, again, we hired a vendor in 2012 to delineate the impervious cover in the watershed. So we have those data for the entire Lake Erie watershed. Point source data, this is some typical stuff that would be more involved with on the agency end. And then ecological data, which is more near and dear to my heart. So lots of the research that's happened in the drainage has been converted to a geospatial layer. So you can click on and off these layers, you can click points, it pops up all the fish data, all the macro data, habitat data, more data than you probably ever want to look at. Recreation, public access data, water use data. And so the other thing is some of these data sets that we've been collecting, there's something called the Pennsylvania Spatial Data Access Network, and this is supported by Penn State University. What it is the geospatial clearinghouse for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So you can go to POSDA and do keyword searches, you can search by county, but some of the data we've been collecting recently, all that is hosted on POSDA. So you can go on there and download our high resolution ortho imagery from 2012, 2015, our impervious cover data from 2012, as well as all our LiDAR data that was collected in 2012 and 2015. And I'm hoping to work with POSDA moving forward as well to host the rest of our data, because data takes a lot of space. So again, I'm not a web developer, I'm actually a fisheries biologist, so if you have technical questions, I'll try my best, but I'd be happy to answer any fish questions.
Where'd that fish come from?
20 Mile Creek.
Okay, so today we're going to look at the geology of Erie County and look at how the state and other places around the country manage shoreline erosion on bluffs. So that's our plan. So we're going to start off a brief review of the history of bluff monitoring on the coast of Pennsylvania. We'll look at some coastal geology. We'll look at why bluffs retreat and how they retreat over time. Then we'll look at some mitigation efforts or ways to mitigate the erosion problem, and today I'm just going to focus on setback distances, which is only one aspect of many that can be used to stabilize bluff slopes. For example, DEP came out with a guide in 2007, revised last year, the best vegetative best management plan. So that's another, a more eco-friendly way of doing things, but today we'll look at the more sort of geological and engineering approach to working with stabilizing bluffs. I'm going to review a BEP index, which is short for a Bluff Erosion Potential Index. That's what we got funded to do, and that's still in development. But what I'm going to do is look at how other different states actually consider regrading slopes and adding extra setbacks to come up with a more conservative setback distance for buildings near bluffs. And then we'll get a short conclusions, and that's where we'll go today. So to start off, the report is available on the Walter site Sean mentioned earlier, so it's been up there for a while. If you're interested in reading a very long report with lots of science and lots of writing, that's for you. It's on Walter, it should be very easy to find that. So first of all, we just look at what the state of knowledge report cover that I'm going to be talking a bit about today, but then also we move on and look at the BEP index. What the report is, it reviewed coastal change patterns for our state and for other states, and see how they change over time, and basically how states are moving to try and predict where bluff crests will be in the future, because that's important to homeowners, because if you live too near a bluff top, it's a risky place to live. So just by a show of hands, how many people actually live near a bluff in the audience today? Oh, one, two, okay. So, yeah, a lot of people live on bluffs. We'll see a map in a minute. They're very well developed globally. Our report also identified information gaps and made recommendations for future, better, perhaps bluff management using more science in the process. We're looking at a nationally developing best management practice, or a BMP, and that's essentially the BEP index I'll be talking about. We're looking at a way that other states are considering to make their bluff management more effective. So just with everything in context, our coast here, we've got, there is an economic context to bluff erosion problems that most people probably don't think about it too much, but in 2012, the Erie County Department of Public Safety, their hazard mitigation plan, looked at bluff erosion problems, and they figured out that there are about 265 structures at risk of bluff impacts over time, whether that's total property destruction or damage. And the total monetary value of material at risk is about $66 million, and that's just in Erie County. And a relatively small number if compared to other coastlines on ocean coasts, for example, that are more developed, but it's a big number for us. And then a little further back in time, the Pennsylvania Winery Association looked at the wine industry in Pennsylvania and figured out it contributed about $2.4 billion to the economy, directly and indirectly. And it turns out a lot of our vineyards are very close to the coast, within 5 kilometers. So if you're a vineyard owner and you're north of Route 5, you do worry about losing land along the lake edge, because every acre you lose is property lost and wine sales reduced. So the brief history, this is kind of a texty slide, but we'll just run down through the history as briefly as possible. We've got about 73 kilometers of bluff coastline on our coast. The total coast is about 123 kilometers. That includes Presque Isle, the bay sides, that's where all that extra mileage comes from. And we're dominated, at least on our mainland shoreline or lakefront shoreline, by these bluffs that range in elevation from about 1.5 meters to about 55 meters, more or less. Okay. So they get pretty tall. It's about 180 feet maximum height. DEP has monitored these bluffs since the 1980s, we could argue the 1970s, to get a handle on how much erosion is occurring over time. They've done field mapping every 4 years or so. What they do is they go out on the coastline, and roughly every half kilometer, 500 meters, they monitor how the shoreline, the bluff crest, is moving landward over time. And as I said, they do that every 4 year intervals roughly. And what they've noticed so far in their data set, which is now about 3 decades or more, the average erosion rate for the whole county is about 0.1 meter per year to about 0.3 meters per year. So that's about 1 foot to about, a tenth of a meter, that's 0.3 feet to about 1 foot per year. That's the kind of range. We'll see a map in a minute, it's higher in some places, not as high in others. And then Dr. Paul Knuth at Edinburgh University of Pennsylvania did a lot of research beginning in the 1980s, because he was working closely with coastal zone management to develop and identify where the erosion problems were. 2004, DEP had a GIS analysis done of the coastline by a Michigan company to find out, basically to try and predict where the bluff lines would be in the future as a tool to help better manage the bluff, the eroding bluffs. And then what we're doing in our project as part of this BEP index and the SOK report is we're looking at bluff change rates over time. We're scaling we're actually using LIDAR data to look at erosion rates at a very, very fine, relatively fine detail. About every 20 meters we've got a transect. Remember, DEP in the past has had a 500 meter transect. And I think the 2004 project with the Michigan group was about every 33 meters. So when we scale it down to every 20 meter transects, that's good, because then we start to catch all those little erosion problems. Like a major slump, it might only be 30 meters across or 50 meters. And they tend not to be seen in the workhorse historical data. So this is the most recent map. This is a DEP map, because we're still working on our project and numbers, but this is the DEP map, came out recently, and it's courtesy of Jake Moore with DEP. What it shows is the erosion rates along the coast every 500 meters on average. So that's what all these bars are. Each of these is a monitoring point tracked by DEP since the 1980s. And you can see the rates are very variable. And then when you lump them together by municipality, you see a nicer, I guess, easier trend to look at. We have very high, well, relatively high erosion rates out in the western part of the county not so much in the middle, and then they pick up again going eastward. So a nice trend. And we'll get to talk about why, and there's some reasons why the erosion rate is high out here. Right, it's very low, for example, in Erie and Presque Isle Basin, we probably know why, and then it picks up again going eastward. So this is where that 0.1 to 0.3 meters per year number comes from. And the state uses these then These are actually the municipality averages, and these are the ones that are used by the state to make its recommendation how far a setback should be from the bluff edge to build a building. And then we'll look at this a little later on, but some of the municipalities are making the requirement a little more rigorous. They're being more cautious and more conservative and suggesting that houses build further back from the bluff edge. So every little dot on the map here is one of these 500-meter increment marks with an erosion rate associated with it across the entire 73 kilometers of bluff coast. So bluffs in general are very common throughout the planet. There's a lot of them, as this map is trying to show. Every dark area on here is a bluff coastline. So anything where the land basically sticks 1.5 meters or more above sea level or lake level. Okay, so this includes beaches and things. So they're very, very common. So a lot of people are at risk from bluff erosion globally, but fortuitously, bluffs tend to be less attractive for development than beaches, and more scenic, flat coastlines tend to be. So they've got that going. Even though their one response to nature is to erode, to be stable or to erode. They can't grow like a beach can. At least they're not targets of heavy urban development in general around the planet. So what do bluffs look like when they erode? Well, this is the U.S. Geological Survey picture, and it shows the various kinds of ways that bluffs actually fail. And this is a relatively simple one. It's just got 9. The ones highlighted with the red circles are the ones that impact us. So we see all kinds of bluff failure mechanisms on our coastline. And then the extra heavy red lines, like this guy right here, here, and here, they're our most common ones. We get these rotational slides, we get translational slides, and we get debris flows. So they're the 3 we get mostly, but let's say we've got a lot of these other guys as well. We don't get rock falls, obviously, as we don't have rocky, tall cliffs like they might have in Maine or on the Pacific Northwest. So this is basically categorization based on 3 common parameters that are used a lot in geology. We look at the material composition. Is the material muddy, or is it sandy, or is it rock? How fast does it move? So a flow is usually a little slow, well, a lot slower than a fall. A fall will achieve the speed of acceleration due to gravity. This is enough vertical distance. Flows tend to be limited by the slopes that are coming down. Flatter slopes will flow slow, steeper slopes will flow faster. And then internal water content is very important. Water helps reduce friction, and the wetter your material. We know that in Erie County, I think. We get most of our bluff erosion activity during the fall and spring months when we get a lot of precipitation. So that's an important material. So just to show you an animation, hopefully this will work. We're going to run to a site in Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, actually. Let's see if it runs. Okay, here we go. Just to show you what bluff erosion looks like, and this is like a graphic, pseudo 3D parking schematic. And we'll come back to this slide a little later because it's a very useful tool on building setbacks. We can all try at home and see maybe how much setback we should consider if we lived too close to a bluff. So we'll run a 3D animation. It's this little box right here. We've got a lake. So this is Lake Michigan. We've got a beach. We've got a blue line, which you can barely make out. That's basically the base of the toe. We've got the bluff crest up here, and we've got properties along here, and we've got a highway up here. Okay, so this is an animation covering roughly 50 years of a site. It's actually near Concordia University in Wisconsin. So we'll just run this, and it's what they've tracked in this time frame obviously is the bluff top is trackable with LiDAR data or their photography, and you can also track the shoreline. The stuff in here in the bluff is a little more subjective. There's a lot more schematic stuff going on here. So you can see over time, this is what our bluffs do. They erode slowly but surely backwards. About a foot a year might be the average in Erie County. So slowly but surely, stuff falls off, goes in the lake, gets washed away, and it just keeps going and going and going. And it has been doing that for centuries, for millennia on the Great Lakes. Our lakes get a little bigger every year because the edges fall in like a puddle of water on the sand that your kids would play on the beach. So that's an animation. We'll come back to this a little later, but you get a feel for how bluffs retreat. It's very variable. A spot down here might have eroded further back than a spot up here. We might have slumps happening here, so we get a lot of material lost from here. The profile will vary quite a bit. This line running through here shows we've got kind of an arc-shaped surface down here. It might be the opposite. It might be what you call convex outward. So we'll come back to this a little later on. Hopefully. Okay, so let's look at some geology for a bit. Our geology on our Lake Erie coastline or bluffs look like. As I said, they get up to about 180 feet tall. We tend to have, in a lot of places, we have bedrock on the bottom. That goes up to about 7 meters tall. A lot of places it's not there. In the western part of the county, there's very little bedrock sticking above the lake surface. And I mention that because bedrock is good. It's more resistant to erosion, to wave attack than non-bedrock would be. For example, glacial till, which is another material. On top of that, we tend to get glacial till, which is basically mud, messy stuff. It's clay, silt with large boulders thrown in. It can be kind of hard, it can be soft, nowhere near as resilient as bedrock would be. And on top of that, we've got usually several meters, perhaps 10 meters locally, of lake bottom sediments, which are now well above lake level, because historically Lake Erie used to be up and over the top of these bluffs and heading up towards beyond the route, towards Route 20. We've seen a lot of lake level drop over the past 12,000 years. And then right at the top, we sometimes have two places in the county. We get what are called high stand beach ridge plain deposits, so they're very gravelly. Pea gravel is a common term. Piles of sand are associated with deltas that formed on the coast. There's one out towards the northeast and then one out here in Lake City, the Girard area. They're our two highest locations on the lakefront. And it turns out, we'll see in a bit, they tend to erode pretty fast because this pea gravel sitting up here is not very stable. This is what till looks like close up. So this is a beach, this is sticks on a beach, looking up at the till. There's bedrock missing here, so we're somewhere out in the western part of the county. We've got lots of erosion gullies carved by rainfall and runoff coming down the surface. Our lake sands are up here, and oftentimes these are very permeable and porous. They carry a lot of groundwater. And that groundwater percolates downward, it hits this till, this glacial till, which is not very permeable. And that forces the groundwater to come out along seeps along the top edge of the till. That's why we started seeing these gullies getting cut below the till contact. Typical appearance of a high bluff. This is, if you're interested, Pennsylvania DEP has got a big database of oblique aerial photographs for the whole coast going back for years and years. So this just happens to be, I think it's a 2015 image of a location out towards the northeast, showing us what a typical eroding bluff looks like on our coastline. So we tend to get, these things are called rotational slides. See how the land has jumped back here, it's jumped back here, it's jumped back here. These are just places where it just fails. It's called a rotational slump, and it'll just slump down over the course of days to weeks and take all that material, like for example, the bluff crest here used to be running across this way. All the material heads down the lake, and it may last there a couple of weeks, depending on the season, and eventually the waves wash it away to places usually further east. And then historically, if we go back even further in time, this large one here, there's now a house sitting in. This is also a slump, but it's been there since pre-1880, I believe. When we look at aerial photographs, and actually predating those U.S. lake survey maps that were done to show that this feature was still there, it was there in 1880, so it's a much older feature. So people now live in these, and this one looks pretty stable, it's well vegetated, groundwater comes out of it, the streams sinking out of this thing the whole time. But then they got to look left and right and see that we're getting these slumps here that are driven by groundwater for the most part of this location. A lot of water coming down through these, this grave territory into the sands and gravels, hitting the glacial till, and then just causing instability. This one's out on the west side of the county where we tend to have smaller bluffs. They're not quite as high, maybe 30 feet. We don't have any bedrock on the bottom. And this is 2015 again, when the lake levels were quite a bit lower than today. Today we have lake levels high enough that it's basically very hard to walk along most of this western Erie County bluff coastline today. And what that means is, if we zoom in here, this is a view standing right on the shoreline looking landward, and you see we get the waves actually do a lot of damage in the base of these bluffs right here. They chew away at it. There's places where these what are called wave cut notches actually cut in about a meter and a half. And eventually what happens is all this stuff sitting up here just falls off, and anything sitting up here like the lake sediments, the tan ones you can see, they all turn and slump. So there's all kinds of interesting things that happen geologically. Different bluffs behave in different ways depending on whether there's bedrock there or not. This stick here for scale is 5 meters, so it's 16 feet going from down about here to the top, so you get a sense for scale. Place where groundwater plays a big role. This is a bit like the one we looked at a couple of minutes ago. This is again one of these historical, pre-1880 large slumps. And here's an active one today, or it's 2015, another one over here. And if we zoom in, you will notice this walking along the shoreline a lot on our bluffs. We'll see basically water coming out of the top of the till and running down the till surface, carving those gullies, and then things get oversaturated and we get a mud flow. So that if you put your foot in this, you'll easily sink in a foot. It's a very, very liquid, almost like a slurry. And then some of it actually, the extra watery parts flow out across the beach, bury the sand. We've got this very fine, muddy gray material. So again, there's a slightly different mechanism there. So it's like a mudslide, like something you see on TV in Southeast Asia during, what season is that?
Monsoon.
Monsoon, yes. So, looking at how bluffs retreat, in general, geologically, this is sort of the standard model for a bluff anywhere on the planet. The perception is that bluffs, if you look at them over a very long time period, we're talking centuries, will go back in what's called parallel face retreat. So, right here, this is some point back in time, and then sometime forward, a couple of centuries, our profiles are now here, and it keeps going back. So over very long time periods, we can say our bluffs kind of retreat in parallel bluff face fashion. Okay, it's a very simple way of thinking about how it works, because as we shorten the time frame of examination, they work quite differently, but this is a nice summary that works for bluffs. It's actually developed for sand beaches on the East Coast by a guy called Broom back in the 1960s. A similar kind of geometric pattern applies to the way beaches and barrier rounds retreat in the Outer Banks and Georgia and so on. If we zoom a little closer, this one actually is more like what our bluffs do. So now we shorten the time frame, so we're down to looking at decades now. We've gone from centuries to decades. Bluffs in all reality do more of this. So what we have happening is we've got time on here. So we'll walk you through it. So time one, we've got a bluff face, relatively steep, okay? Make sure we get that right. Okay, and then as things happen, like waves erode and we get runoff coming off the top, that gets steeper and steeper over time until we get back to our time two. So bluffs go through this, what's called a failure cycle. They'll start off maybe relatively stable, they'll get steeper, and there's really no change up here in the bluff crest, but we're losing a lot of material from here out into the lake. And then over a very short time period, we go from time two to time three, where what happens is we get one of these big rotational slides or a big translational slide, which is more step-like, and all that stuff slides down here, ends up out in the lake. So we go from a time period of 1 to 2 with not much bluff crest change to a time period when there's a lot of bluff crest change. And people tend to think, okay, my bluff hasn't been active for 10 or 15 or 20 years. That doesn't mean that things are stable, it just means it's probably just in a more stable state temporarily. And it could easily revert to an unstable state and see a major jump back in your bluff edge, and then it might go stable again for a while. So that's the model then that works for the Great Lakes. That comes from a bunch of Canadian researchers, it works well in Canada, and it kind of conveys a message that DEP tells us, that bluff, it's very hard to predict how bluffs will change over time. They're not always doing the same thing all the time. Rates change, locations change, and so on, depending on a whole bunch of factors. And this is more recent, again, now we're down to years. So a researcher from Ohio, his last name was Amin, back in 2001, did some research on the western Erie County bluffs to show how, in cross-section, how they really look like over a couple of seasons and a couple of years back in the late 80s, early 90s. And you can see they're not following the parallel bluff retreat story we saw from the very long-term picture. They're actually getting locally steeper. Like here's one of those wave-cut notches, for example. It cuts in about 1 meter or 2. And then sometime later, it just fractures, and all this stuff will topple off. So a little time later, then we've lost a major chunk of material, and it sits out in the lake. And that was one of those earlier slides. It was a strip photo on the bottom. We get these huge blocks of bluff material just sitting there, and eventually the waves will remove it. And that's what this shows. This year, out in western Erie County, as I said, our lake level is high this year, so we've got the waves chewing away at the base of this glacial till. Glacial till is not rock, it erodes relatively easily. So we'll get the wave cut, notch cut, and eventually it'll just fracture. We'll get these big fractures, and the stuff will just topple off, it'll just drop out into the lake. Which is, you think about it, This spot wasn't too far from, this is Raccoon Creek. So we have a lot of people using the beach in Raccoon Creek. If they wander down the coast and you're trying to stay dry, you're walking by these things that are waiting to fail. The odds of being hit, obviously, are probably very, very slim, but it does occur. So we get these failures, and we see the usual gullies, and when this lump falls off here, the stuff sitting up here, the lake, the former lake floor sands, there's nothing supporting them anymore, so they'll start to run down and slide down and fall off the bluff and end up down there too. So visually, it's a very messy looking mess on these bluffs when they're eroding. So we're not going to look at the slide if you can't read it, number one, but there's an awful lot of factors that control how fast bluffs erode, why they erode, where they erode, and different factors have different roles. So we'll just look at some of these guys, again, more visually, so we'll move on. And we'll look at the lake story for Lake Erie, and what we have here is a plot for the last century, more or less, comes from NOAA, from 1917 forward to today, more or less. And the blue dots is the average annual lake, although that's average monthly lake level elevations over time. So you can see lake level goes up and down a lot. And lake level is important because it moves wave attack, either up onto the bluff or off the bluff. So high lake levels in general you think as being not a good thing because it allows the waves to chew away the bluffs. Lower lake levels are better for us. You could argue if you didn't have any lakes at all, eventually those bluffs would regrade to a more stable landscape, a nice hill, and we don't have bluff erosion anymore. Then we don't have lake views. Right? Oops. So the interesting number on here is over the past century or so, we've had lake level rise about 6 feet from back here up to here. So this was July of this year, relatively high, some of the very highest lake levels historically, past century. Now it's dropped down a couple of fractions of a foot through October. So our lake level goes up and down a lot. And over the past century, roughly, it's risen 6 feet. If we sort of look at how that floods over a gradually sloping beach, and most of our beaches on the west side out here are about 9 or 10 degrees, that means when lake level rises 6 feet, we could lose about 40 foot of beach. Okay, so during years of low lake levels, you local people would know that we get wide beaches on our coast. When lake level rises, we lose that. Okay? Nobody knows where lake level is going in the future. And NOAA has modeled the guys up at the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab. The general consensus is lake level is going to rise about 1.8 feet, so 2 feet, over the next century. That's their best estimate. There's a lot of spread in the estimates. But if we raise lake level by about 2 feet, we're going to see a loss of about 12 foot of beach. So if lake level kept going up, we'd see narrow beaches. We'd expect to see more bluff erosion. So bluff behavior then is very dependent on where the lake level is. Groundwater is also important. I talked about groundwater already. You know, the lake floor sediments and the sand, the pea gravel sitting on top. That stuff just loves soaking up water. It flows through that stuff down and eventually hits the till, and then it's flowing out in the subsurface. That's what these blue arrows denote. And also near the surface, they help develop these regular, streams develop that are fed almost exclusively by groundwater. And you can see we've got a pretty large. This is Duck Run. This is out at the Erie Bluff State Park. We've got Duck Run, and then a series of smaller streams heading up to where this former lake floor pinches out against Elk Creek. And this is our high stand pea gravel sitting here. So it's interesting in how groundwater can dictate what the landscape looks like on map view. This is LiDAR data, which is basically high frequency radar. It's like a photograph. It strips off all the trees you don't want to see and stuff, but you can see well-developed drainage systems fed by this groundwater. And this groundwater also is why we tend to have high erosion rates out here in parts of the western part of the county. Another interesting groundwater thing is, this is right off the Walter site, one of Sean's items he mentioned. We've got watersheds or sub-watersheds that don't have streams going through them. This is northeast. So this is northeast right here. This is the creek that runs through northeast, which is 16 Mile, I believe. And then we've got watersheds, sub-watersheds that are just west along Route 5 that don't have any water, any surface water on them. That means every raindrop that falls on this watershed and this watershed becomes groundwater. And the way the land slopes, that groundwater is moving towards the bluff, heading this way. that's not good because we're reducing friction within the material of the bluffs, and they want to fail a little faster. This watershed right here, a lot of rain landing on here will be directed towards the streams and become surface flow, so there'll be less groundwater moving towards the bluff. So you'd expect to see these bluffs here to be stabler or less erosional, the ones along these two. These were dry watersheds because all the water is going towards the bluffers. Waves are important, obviously, especially during high lake level periods. Waves do a lot of destruction of bluff material. So this is a storm from last week, from the 17th. That was a really windy day we had last week. This is NOAA data. What it shows us is wave height on Lake Erie at a certain time was, I think it was 2300 GMT, so that was, what time is that? That's maybe 9 p.m. more or less. And we had waves as tall as 10 feet just east of us. So waves can get really big on Lake Erie. We don't think about it that much because big storms in the winter, in the fall, and the spring, it's dark early. We don't know what's going on in the lake, but we get waves bigger than 10 foot, but this is a nice one showing a 10-foot event at Presque Isle further east. Most of our wave energy actually comes, if we look at this as an average, it's called a wave rose diagram, shows where all of our wave energy comes from over time using data from 1979 through 2014. This is kept track of by the Corps of Engineers. They tell us that our dominant wave direction comes out of the west-northwest. It's about 290 odd degrees is the orientation our average wave would come from. And if you think about it, that's not good for us because then we're getting hit by these oncoming waves all the time. If we lived up on this shore up here in Canada, things would be much better, right? Because we're in what's called a lee shore. The wind is blowing offshore most of the time compared to us. So waves do a lot of damage. And recently, there's an equation you guys don't need to know for your test, but this is a very useful equation for figuring out how much damage waves can do. Or more specifically, when you have a wave out here in the lake and it's coming towards the shoreline, how far up the beach that wave can run vertically. Because we're interested in finding out, will it chew away the toe of the bluff, or will it just not get to the bluff? Will it all wash out as it crosses the beach? So using this storm as a hypothetical, nice storm seas, we have a 3-meter wave, that's 10 feet. These things tend to have a wave period, which 7 seconds, all it means is a wave coming in every 7 seconds. A decent wavelength of about 78 meters, that's like 240-ish feet between crests. So you can picture it's like a big ocean wave almost. We're using a beach slope, or a foreshore beach slope of 11 degrees, a very common beach slope in our area. The highest 2% of the waves, which is, this statistic is actually used by the Corps of Engineers and also by FEMA for flood studies, that number is 2.3 meters. So that means that wave will run 2.3 meters vertically above the still water line, which is the lake level if there were no waves. Okay. That number is important because most of our bluffs, the toe of our bluff, where it joins the beach, is an elevation of about 0.7 meters, at least in western Erie County. So that tells us then that storm waves can easily run quite a distance up a bluff face. So waves then do a lot of damage, especially now with lake levels being high. Because if you've seen till, you know you can actually rub the material off with your finger. Wave energy carrying sand and grit and small boulders can do a lot of mass removal very, very quickly. So waves, very important. In coastal geology in general, whether it's us or whether it's a hurricane event on the Outer Banks, and waves are very powerful means of moving sediment off a coastline. Bluff height. This one's kind of geometry. If you like geometry, it kind of makes sense, right? Taller bluffs, you expect bigger problems. Because what happens is a lot of these failure events we have on our coast, where we're getting what's called a slip plane or a failure surface. This one's pretty steep. This one's about 80 degrees, but some of them, like we see over here, this one might be 45 or 60 degrees or something. The taller your bluff, just means the more this fall plane can track up to the top of the bluff. So a big bluff then will see a lot of cutback during a failure event. A low bluff, this one's kind of low. It's only, I think it's 15 feet from here to here. We'll see much less material lost off the bluff, so less bluff crest retreat. So that's a simple geometry, but very appropriate because we have very high bluffs. And we expect to see a lot of retreat of the crest during a failure event, because this thing will obviously carry many houses full of materials, a house here for scale. And you wouldn't see that being as dramatic if the bluff was only this tall. You see a similar shape, but a much smaller volumes moved out into the lake. So moving on to management, so I focused today on how we sort of deal with the erosion problem, how we entice people maybe not to live in too risky an area on the bluff crest. So this table shows us what the state of Pennsylvania does in Erie County for bluff setbacks. We've got 3 columns. First one is for regular houses, and what the state assumes the house is going to last. The lifetime of the house is about 50 years. The state looks at commercial setbacks, commercial buildings, and says we should plan for those things being around for about 75 years. And big sort of commercial industrial stuff, or sewage treatment, pumping stations, electricity stations, so on, let's assume they last for about 100 years. So what the state does then is it took the average annual erosion rate for each municipality, multiplied it by each of these numbers, and came up with a recommended setback for each municipality. That's the left column in each of these 3 large columns. Okay, so the state then suggests that people don't build too close to a bluff. If your house, it doesn't seem too bad, 100 feet, you've got to build 100 feet back. But if you're in downtown Erie, because we've got a bay and we don't get as big wave energy, it's only about 25 foot of setback. But then out in the western part of the county, what municipalities have realized, well, things are really, potentially, let's play a more conservative game. So they have increased the state recommendation. So for example, let's take commercial setback for Lake City Borough. The state recommends 90 feet. Lake City says let's make it 150. And that's a way for a municipality to deal with the risk. Then. So what they're doing here is they're taking, I'm trying to introduce this term because we'll use it a couple of times moving forward, this AARR, which is the average annual erosion rate. Okay, that comes from these plots, essentially in Pennsylvania. We'll multiply it by the expected lifetime of the building. And that'll give us the distance. So then when we do that, you can see numbers, as I said, vary from 25 feet for a house in Erie to 200 feet for an industrial setback out in Springfield. So the numbers vary quite a bit. And that's good because it reflects, to some extent, the hazard associated with each of these municipalities. Some areas are more risky to live in than others. So that's an AOR term. Remember that because we're going to use it a couple more times. What do other places do? Ohio, right west of here, they're very GIS-centric. What they do every 10 years or so is they map out where the bluff crest is. So the bluff crest on here is a little hard to see. It's the white dashed line here, and then it becomes the red line over here. They map this stuff out, and they figure out what the erosion rate is, and they develop these things called coastal erosion areas. So a coastal erosion area on this photograph is the area north or lakeward of this red line. So this location here to the bluff edge. And what they do here is they will tell people who want to build in these areas, you can't build in here, anywhere within this zone, unless you can, in your plans, submit proof that you're going to do something on the bluff or on the bluff toe that will prevent the erosion happening over the next, in the case of Ohio, it's 30 years. So what they do, the red line actually is a prediction of where the bluff crest will be in 30 years. So it's quite a bit back from the current bluff crest, which here is actually little X marks, I believe. And that's how Ohio takes care of the problem. So very, very like Pennsylvania, but maybe they've got more variability in the numbers because they do the survey every 10 years. And if we came back and did in 10 years and look at the erosion rates, this place might have gotten stable. And therefore, for the next 10-year period, you could in theory build your house close to the bluff and the state would not mind per se. Ohio does a lot of this. It's very proactive in guiding engineering companies and municipalities and how to best engineering treat an erosion problem. So they produce these model plans for bluff restoration on properties in Ohio. So their bluff geology is very similar to ours. It turns out they've got bedrock down here, they've got till, they've got lake sediments. What you'll notice is they're in favor of putting in a lot of toe protection. Pennsylvania isn't really into that as much as other states. Ohio seems to be. Illinois is very into having engineering solutions to bluff stability. It's been said that Ohio, its goal is to armor as much of its shoreline as possible, because that's a surefire way, at least on human timescales, 1 or 2 human timescales, to stop your bluff eroding. It becomes very expensive, it becomes an eyesore, you could argue. But some states are very pro this. Ohio's okay. Pennsylvania's more with having setbacks and using other ways, like vegetative practices, to reduce the effect of bluff erosion. So another thing I want to talk about, the key term on here we'll also introduce in a minute, is this SSA term. This is the stable slope angle. So the engineers have sat down, the geologists have sat down, they figured out a stable slope angle in Ohio, a good one to use, turns out to be about 26 degrees, 26.5 degrees. So they recommend people regrade their bluff to a more stable slope. It's not going to fall into the lake as much. They put in toe protection, and then they can build up here, for example. Okay? So originally this bluff might have come all the way up to here and then drop down vertically. But they've regraded it, they put in toe protection, and now it's in a more stable state, at least for a building lifetime, maybe 2 building lifetimes, and you can build your house either on the bluff crest here, or a lot of states will push you back about 25 feet. That gives you room to move bulldozers around if 100 years from now you want to move your house to relocate it back an extra distance from the bluff edge. So that's what Ohio does. A little different to Pennsylvania in this regard. We're going to move to Wisconsin, there's an even more complicated version of this. So we've got to look at this. It'll take a couple of minutes. We've got to run down through this, what the slide is actually telling us. So maybe we'll go with scenarios. Let's say today we've got a lake, so Lake Michigan, we've got a bluff, we've got a bluff plateau. We've got someone who wants to build a house up here. Okay? This is the bluff edge. It's the key sort of marker or reference point. Wisconsin, what Wisconsin assumes is the present bluff face is more than likely unstable, as most bluff faces tend to be, unless they're very gradual, unless they're down a slope of 20-ish degrees. Wisconsin will assume, several municipalities do, this is an unstable surface. What they want you to do is to mentally, not like Ohio, and actually go in and regrade the surface, but think ahead in time and think what a stable slope angle would be for your coast. And maybe it's 20 degrees, maybe it's 18.5, maybe it's 25. But what they'll do is project that up from the toe of the bluff, up through the bluff material itself, to where this crest would be. This is what the crest would be for a stable bluff today. Okay? While the bluff is doing this, it's also eroding at the toe all the time. So the toe is retreating backwards. So if you think forward, the stable slope angle, and then add to that the ongoing AARR, so the average annual retreat rate times time, where this bluff would be in X, say 100th century, according to Wisconsin, would be back here, this dash line, this is the future bluff. Okay. They also entice property owners to put in a facility setback, so that's basically breathing room for your house, so you can bring a digger in and move the house if you need to later. So in this diagram, the front of your house is going to be here, okay, a long ways back. On this diagram schematically, if we look at Pennsylvania today, and we use the average annual retreat rate, Pennsylvania would put you sitting, this would be your Pennsylvania limit, so quite a bit closer to the bluff, okay, using those setbacks we saw on that table. So a lot of states are going this way. Wisconsin's leading the way with California, and also Ontario, Canada. It's a way to think about bluffs not being stable, and if you want to build a 100-year house, you need to build further back from the bluff. And it's not just the erosion, the average annual erosion rate times the time you're building. You should account for having a more gradual bluff face, or allowing for it in the future. Okay. So that'll reduce a couple of terms. The AOR we've seen before, the MFS, which is the minimum facility setback, and the SSA is the stable slope angle. And all Pennsylvania does today is we do this. We have the recession setback times the time for the building. So much smaller distance, so plotted from the crest backward is this green distance here. It's quite a bit smaller. Okay. So this is where some states are going. Great Lakes, Pacific Coast in particular, are going this route. An example of 5 minutes. An example of what it looks like in action is this is the campus for Concordia University, showing what they've done to stabilize their bluff. in the last couple of years. They spent $12 million. It gets very expensive if you go out and do, like the image we saw in Ohio, where you've got to regrade the bluff. They put in toe protection. They drained a lot of water out of here. It ended up costing $12 million per kilometer of shoreline. Very, very expensive proposition. It looks very nice from the air, and it's a nice way to deal with an erosion problem that eventually would have cut back enough, buildings would have started falling into the lake. So they've got a stable slope angle, got a setback still to their existing buildings, and they've also put in some toe protection to stop the toe eroding away. This one. So let's look at a visualization, returning back to our Wisconsin website. This is a very useful tool. You can try this at home. If you've got a friend who lives near a bluff and you've got some data to plug in. So for example, with a tall bluff, so let's assume we've got a bluff height of 180 feet. That's our biggest one in our on the Great Lakes here, 180 feet. Our current bluff angles tend to be pretty steep. An average one might be 55 degrees, okay? A stable bluff angle, there's a lot of research on this, a reasonable number is 20 degrees. When you plug this into the calculator, it tells you the stable setback angle should be about 370 feet. That's a lot of distance. You add to that the recession rate over the lifetime of the building, you get a very big number, right? It's 470 feet. That's a lot of land that Wisconsin would suggest you not build on. You build that far back from the bluff crest. And the big problem with that is what? Lots are oftentimes not that deep. So there's, even though it's a nice developing erosion potential, so dealing with erosion index, it's still getting there's a lot of pros and cons with it. One is the loss of, for example, property you wanted to live on, but now you can't live on. Sometimes, if you think back to the slide I just looked at, is when you're sitting way back here, your view of the lake is going to be seriously curtailed. You're never going to see the shoreline. So I got to really shorten up about 3 minutes, I believe. It's going a lot slower than I thought. But we're developing a bluff erosion potential index that basically takes the stuff I've just been talking about, the average annual erosion rate, the time frame for a building, stable slope angle, and mapping that hazard in map view for a watershed for Erie County. So it would look a little bit like, I'm going to jump around a little bit because I was going way slower than I thought. This is a similar process being done in the state of Oregon. They are basically mapping, the very high erosion potential areas, which are in red, a little less erosion in yellow, a little less again in green. So a property owner could, for example, realize, well, do I want to build my house maybe in the green zone? Can I go in the yellow zone? Maybe I don't want to go in the red zone. So what we're doing is we're adopting and applying a method that's used in Oregon to our coastline, okay, to map out hazard areas in map view by watershed. So when this finally gets finished, on the water we'll be able to create maps that look like this and see for your general watershed, the Elk Creek area, the 12-mile Creek area, how bad does the erosion problem look like if we add in all these additional variables like the stable slope and the facility setback. So I'm going to jump to my conclusions because I'm really out of time. What we're doing, let's say, is making map products that show relative hazard along the coast. Very high erosion potential, high erosion potential, moderate erosion potential, and low erosion potential. And the goal is property owners can then see that and decide where to build and where not to build. The key caveat is it's non-regulatory. That's very important to state. This project is outside of the regulatory process, but so our bluff erosion potential hazard zones are going to be unrelated to current legal setback requirements in Pennsylvania. Those laws still apply. Those laws have to be followed, or those regulations, if you want to build near a bluff in Pennsylvania. But I think this is a useful thing for property owners to be able to look at and see, where does their house plot in relation to these three zones. And also realize that Great Lakes states and states in the Pacific Northwest, California northward, are going this route. They're stepping away from the simple erosion rate times the time frame of the house and adding in this stable slope extra distance and adding in sometimes this additional little moving around room as well to give you very big setback distances. But positively, The upside is it reduces a lot of risk, insurance risk, economic risk, from living or farming close to bluffs. The downside is it potentially sets off a lot of land that people now realize is riskier than they thought. And that, you could have issues with that. Maybe people don't want to lose their lake view. Maybe they want to live close to the bluff top and not worry about their house being there in 100 years. So that concludes my talk today. I'm sorry to rush at the end, but all this information is in the SOK report. If you've got questions afterwards, I can give you more details. So I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Are there any questions on that are in the audience?
Yes.
You know, we're now available on Walter,
Yes, these maps will be going on Walter. Exactly.
you know, at what time frame?
Well, we're still working on those. A couple of months, I believe. Yes, it's not immediate.
By September of 2019. Right, Mr. Bruno?
Right, I have one question, Tony. And one of the fixes or best management practices was toe protection and installing an engineered solution that's along the toe so there'll be less erosion. Can you just talk for a minute about what the consequences of an engineered, hard-faced shoreline are, not only to where that's located at, but also down drift, properties that are not protected after that toe protection ends?
Right. So just call up. Yeah, we call this diagram just because it's relevant. So yeah, Tim was asking about putting in toe protection. That just means anything at the toe of the bluff, bottom of the bluff. So stuff right here. Toe protection is good because it stops. What does it stop? Wave tag. What does it not stop? Groundwater problems. Exactly. They're in Wisconsin. I have no idea what their tills are. They're probably very light. It's just all formed during the last couple of ice ages, but they've still got groundwater problems here. So you put in a toe, it's great. It stops the wave attack, but you still got to worry about what's happening here. Groundwater coming out is going to cause maybe smaller slumps up here in the high part of the bluff that are occurring no matter what lake level is doing. Because the bluff up here doesn't know the lake is down here. So whether the lake is not here and the lake levels have dropped very low, or putting in toe protection, we will still have that problem. And that's why the stable slope angle becomes a way to deal with that geometrically. We totally regret. This bluff used to be as steep as the one here in the background, and they've regraded a lot. So toe protection is good. The big downside, and this project is fine. This project I think now is 8 years old or so. And you hear about this in coastal engineering a lot. The guys down drifts, so down here off the bottom of the screen, there's been at least one of them has tried to bring a court case. There's a lot of press coverage because you put in this structure right here, it stops this bluff supplying sediment downdrift to the guy living here. So he's saying his argument is, and this would occur quite realistically, that he's losing his bluffs maybe at a faster rate, and he's losing his beach because this is not what's called a feeder bluff. Certain states are dealing with this. Washington State is very good at this. They developed a type of bluff regulatorily called a feeder bluff, and no one can mess with those. They are bluffs around Puget Sound that they realize their goal and their purpose in life is to supply sediment to the littoral zone to make nice beaches. Or in the case of us, if we go down coast a little further, we're at Presque Isle, where the sand coming into Presque Isle relies on erosion coming off our bluffs. So toe protection it's got, like a lot of stuff in engineering, it's got a good and a bad. The other bad thing that happens is, if you're an engineer, you've heard about edge effects or end effects. The waves tend to wrap around the edges of these toe protection structures and really focus energy right at the tips, so down here and up here. But it turns out in this project so far, it's most of the downdrift property owners who are seeing the problem. Even though the engineers going into it and designed this, they thought it wasn't going to be a problem, because they figured there's enough sediment coming down the coast here, just bypass here and keep this guy happy. But the edge effect is still kicking in. It's a negative on this. Otherwise, very pleasant looking revision to a bluff surface. It's hard to get a sense of scale, I guess. I mean, we've got building floors here. These are lampposts, maybe half the height of a person. It's a very expensive, nice looking solution, but will probably be a problem long term for guys down here. Yes.
The lake level is very interesting on the variation. Does it coincide with the amount of rain or anything? You know, I always hear, can't they just let a little more out at Niagara Falls? You know.
Yes. Yeah, it's very climate driven. We warm up, we get more evaporation off the lake. Lake levels drop. That's the general relationship. But when we warm up, we also get more rainfall, which supplies more groundwater, which causes bluffs to fail in another way. So it's oftentimes groundwater and lakes, and the lake are doing two different things, but they kind of go when one's taking tag teaming and one's taking a rest, the other digs in.
So is it predictable on what the lake levels could be?
Probably, I mean, the guys who spend, the research scientists at NOAA, the Great Lakes Environmental Research Lab, who spend their lives doing this, have a hard time predicting it. It's somewhere plus 1.8 foot it's where most of the results are coming in at, about a foot or two. But there's a couple of papers that say it's not going to go up, it's going to drop by X number of feet. Which is interesting because Lake Ontario and the Thousand Islands area did a study to see if they somehow lowered water levels in, was this Lake Ontario? I think it was Lake Ontario. Or was it actually, can you lower water levels on the Thousand Islands? And the St. Lawrence, I don't think you can. They examined that scenario, so if we drop lake level by this much, how does it affect bluff stability? So someone's looked at that, but that's on a different lake, and I forget the results.
All right, thank you very much.
And thanks for the opportunity to put this topic on the agenda. It's something that Sea Grant staff around the basin have worked on for several years now. I'd like to thank my colleagues from Ohio Sea Grant, Jill Barlotta and Sue Bixler, for joining us today. We're going to break this session into 3 sections. Anna McCartney from Pennsylvania Sea Grant is going to give us a brief overview of the issue, really in a nutshell. And then our colleagues from Ohio are going to talk about a social science project that they've been working on in Ohio, dealing with marine debris and human behavior in particular. That was funded through NOAA's Marine Debris Program. And then I'm going to wrap up at the end. So. Okay. Well. Okay. Guess I'll stand up for the phone.
Do you want to adjust it down? It'll tip down for you.
Will it go down? Oh, there. Okay. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I'm going to start by having a little bit of audience participation so that you can wake up a little bit. And so when you look at this particular picture, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Okay, so I'm going to help you out a little bit. Obviously, you see a lot of trash. Hopefully, you're thinking, where in the heck is that? And wondering, how did it get there? Because this is a problem that we see everywhere. And this happens to be local, and I'll tell you where in a minute. There's another one. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Lots of plastic. This is in Northeast, on a beach in Northeast, after a storm. So where does it come from? We work with a lot of students to teach them that the stuff didn't start in the lake, but it started on the land. And it started on school grounds, neighborhoods, parks, and we have kids actually pick up stuff so that they can see what it is. But what happens is it's carried by stormwater, goes to the nearest storm drain or the nearest stream, and it ends up in a waterway. Over 80% of this plastic debris originates where we live, work, and play. It could be far away from any water stream, but it can end up there. It gets carried by the wind, it's deposited. This is stormwater going into Lake Erie. And so all that stuff ends up in streams, rivers, and so on. And so it's found everywhere. It's called marine debris because it's in the water. And it's found in freshwater streams, rivers, and lakes. And these are some of the groups of kids we've had cleaning up those areas. And we're finding an awful lot of trash. This was a recent one that Collegiate Academy students did near Lake Erie on Ordog Road. 419 pounds, mostly plastic, 770 plastic beverage bottles that they picked up in an hour. That's a lot of stuff. This is a map showing a study that was done by Dr. Sherry Mason. She decided to look at plastic and marine debris in freshwater. We knew a lot about the oceans, but nobody had really done studies on freshwater. And if you look at this map, you can see that she found a lot of plastic in Erie, mostly microplastics. This is another map, Adopt a Beach program that's done throughout the Great Lakes. And if you look at those, how much the survey locations and actual surveys, look at Lake Erie, 91% of the stuff they pick up is plastic. And if you look at all those lakes, plastic is predominant in the stuff that we find when we do beach cleanups. The problem with plastics is it does not biodegrade. It sticks around for a long, long time. All the plastic that's ever been made is still with us. It photodegrades, so the sun and the waves and the wind break it down to smaller and smaller pieces. How many of you have ever participated in a beach cleanup? All right, lots of hands, great. One of the things that, from when I started doing beach cleanups about 20 years ago until now on the sheet where you do collect the data, they have microplastics. And we're finding tons of tiny pieces of plastic, and they look like this. These are pieces that I picked up in Northeast along Freeport Beach. It breaks down, or we're also finding the building blocks of plastic. They're called nurdles, those little round things. And we're finding a lot of those as well. And these are, again, some of the kids who found these on Presque Isle, Northeast, lots of different places. Lots of different kinds of plastic. Some of it sinks, some of it floats, and so some of it does both. Scientists have done studies in the streams that go into Lake Erie, 29 tributaries, and they found microplastics in every sample that they collected. So we're finding that it's a problem everywhere, especially in the Great Lakes. Now when you think about watersheds, there's lots of different municipalities. Within those watersheds, we all share that water source. We're all contributing to the problem. And so it's something that we need to start thinking about addressing together, because then you look at Lake Erie and you got all those other sub-watersheds contributing to the problem as well. The water travels, everybody knows this, through the Great Lakes. And from Lake Erie, eventually it goes where? Where does the water from Lake Erie go? It goes over Niagara Falls, and then from Niagara Falls, it goes into the Lake Ontario, then into the St. Lawrence River, and eventually that water ends up where? In the ocean. So this is the stuff that kids are learning now, that the stuff doesn't just stay here. It travels, and so we're contributing to the plastic in the ocean as well as the plastic that's in our own backyard. And so there it goes into the ocean, and this is what the oceans are starting to look like. And it's really pretty sad that we're contributing this material that doesn't easily go away. It's found in the deep ocean, remote islands where people don't live. So it's ending up everywhere, and it's a really, really huge problem. One of the things that happens when it gets into the ocean, the currents carry it around, and so the next few slides that you're looking at shows you trash that started on each of those coasts. This is at 0 years, half a year. See how the stuff travels, and it ends up throughout the ocean. And a lot of it settles near the Hawaiian Islands and in the islands that are uninhabited. Okay, what do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder when you see this? You see 2 dead whales. What you don't see is what's inside those whales. So all of those plastic bags and all that plastic that we use, it's ending up in the ocean, and animals are eating the plastic. This is the gray whale and the contents of that gray whale. Lots of plastic stuff. They can't digest it, obviously. So why is it an issue? Well, it can affect fish, birds, and other wildlife, and we're seeing that. What do you see? What do you think? What do you wonder? Obviously, that plastic came out of that fish. And so we're catching fish that has plastic. These fish are eating, it's a food source. Some of them die by entanglement. Some of it resembles food. You might see the difference between a bag and a jellyfish, but animals who eat jellyfish cannot. And so we're seeing that these plastic pieces are ending up in lots of animals. That's all the plastic that was found in that one bird. We're also finding tiny plastic pieces, particles, that are in the plankton and the building blocks of the food web. And so it seems to be just about everywhere. The other part about plastic is it picks up what's in the water. And it picks up the PCBs and the mercury and the pesticides. And it also can release those things once it ends up in a fish or a different animal that's eaten the plastic. So how can it harm us? Well, how many of you like to eat fish? Okay, so that stuff gets into the chemicals that are in the plastic can be in the fish, and then we eat the fatty tissues where those chemicals build up. And so we don't really know because we haven't done studies to see what's going on inside of people, but we got to think about it. Does the FDA set limits for plastic in seafood before they sold for consumption? True or false? How many people think true? You're right. False. There's no limits because this is a fairly new problem. Plastic hasn't been around a lot of you are probably remember, like me, we didn't have a lot of plastic when I was young. But as we've gone on in time, it's become so ubiquitous. It's everything is made of plastic. How about this one? The EPA has limits for the amount of plastic that can enter streams, rivers, lakes, and groundwater, or limit the amount in seafood. True or false? Anybody think true? No. Again, this is one of those new issues that we haven't really thought a lot about, but it's huge. The scale of the microplastic contamination is just starting to become clear, but we do know with studies that it's been found in drinking water. Again, Dr. Sam Mason from Fredonia was one of the scientists who looked at this, and average tap water is widely contaminated by microplastics. They're so small you need a microscope to see, but look at the U.S. 94.4% of the samples contain plastic fibers, about 4.8 fibers in the U.S. How safe is your bottled water? Well, actually, bottled water had even more plastic in it, so not necessarily something you want to turn to. This is what they found in bottled water. They found 10.4 particles per sample, and what most of it seemed to be the kind of plastic that's in the caps, the plastic caps. And so lots of different types of plastic found in bottled water. But we've also found it in beer. We've found it in honey. We have found it in salt. And the most common type of plastic they found was polyethylene terephthalate, the material used to make plastic bottles. It's in sugar. Shellfish, how many of you like shellfish? Okay, so we know it's in these things. And for instance, it's estimated that people could be unknowingly ingesting 11,000 microfibers each year from shellfish consumption, and 178 microfibers from eating a single mussel. So we have enough data from looking at wildlife to know that it's having an impact. This is Dr. Sherry Mason. She's a microplastic expert. And if it's impacting wildlife, then how do we think that it's not going to somehow impact us? So I, this morning, happened to be looking at my news feed and found that microplastics are turning up even in human excrement. And this was a pilot study. Of course, more study needs to be done, but it's not surprising when you think of it's in shellfish, it's in water, it's in all those other products. Why wouldn't it be in us? So, what kind of grade would you give your home? How are you at making sure that unnecessary, a lot of this stuff is single-use plastic that we don't even need. So how are you at kind of looking at what's in your house? Do you have a lot of single-use items that you really don't need? How about your school? I do a lot of schools. Workplace. How about our community? know, we keep picking up that plastic on a regular basis, but picking it up and doing cleanups isn't the answer. Because it's impossible to remove the plastic, so it has to be kept out of the environment in the first place. And so even if we had a filtration system, it would really be hard to use something like that because you can't separate the microplastics from the plankton that's the basis of the food chain. So, engaging through stewardship, this happens to be 2016. We picked up 5,296 pounds of trash, and participation leads to stewardship, but then we have to lead to behavior change. And so we can't recycle our way out of plastic pollution. Plastic can be downcycled, but it can't be recycled regularly like glass is. It can be made into something else. So we have to rethink plastic, and we have to rethink how we use it. And our basic, and how many of you have been to the plastic exhibit upstairs? It's still there. If you haven't been up there, there's an exhibit that talks about the issue. There are also in the newspaper, how many people are here because they saw this meeting because of the NIE page? Okay. All right, I see some hands. Very good. So if you want to know more about the issue, I've written a lot about the plastic problem. You can go to the Sea Grant website, seagrant.psu.edu. Lots of pages about the plastic issue. And so we want clean water. And it's something that we really need to become more aware of. Maybe you didn't come here thinking you were going to learn much, or you didn't think it was much of an issue, but I hope that this was enough to make you start thinking that it is an issue that all of us need because we all contribute. And so, do you want me to turn it over? Okay, our friends from Ohio Sea Grant have been actually looking at behavior and behavior change. And so they're going to share with you what they've been learning in Ohio. And so hopefully, maybe we can try some of these things here too.
Hello everyone, my name is Jill Barlotta and
I'm Sue Bixler.
And we are educators with Ohio Sea Grant. I'm an extension educator, so I am based in Painesville, which is near Cleveland, but then Sue works out at Stone Laboratory, which is our research facility. Has anyone been to Stone Laboratory or Put-in Bay? Awesome. So one of the projects we're going to talk about is actually happening out at the Lake Erie Islands at Put-in Bay. All right, so as we just heard, beach cleanups are a wonderful tool to pick up this trash, but they're not the answer. So people in our country became obsessed with single-use plastics. So those are plastics that get used once. Often they're used for maybe a few seconds, a couple minutes, and then they're discarded. And so we really became obsessed with this in about the 1950s, and we celebrate throwaway living. And so this image is from Life magazine, and it would take 40 hours to clean all of the items that are being thrown in the air, but you don't need to worry about cleaning anything anymore because you use it and then you throw it away. And so if we really want to solve this plastic issue, we have to stop using these unnecessary single-use plastics, whether they be plastic bags, straws, utensils, the floss picks that are really popular right now, anything like that. And so really evaluating how we use these plastics is the only way that we're going to solve this issue. And really wonky, okay. So the first project I'm going to talk about took place in Northeast Ohio, and I'm just going to share the results of some of our work. I'm going to talk about an upcoming project that we're doing, and I really want to focus on behavior change and the methodology we're using because it's kind of a new area of research on this topic. We have a lot of chemical analysis, we have a lot of biological analysis, but we're not really thinking about what's causing the problem, and that's humans, and ultimately why they make decisions and behave the way they do. And then for our Put-in Bay project, we're going to talk about the status of this project, barriers to implementation. It's similar to here at Presque Isle, it's a tourist-driven industry, and so what are some challenges that arise when we're working with this transient population? And then I'm going to talk about project reception, because there were some concerns doing this project. Would people be willing to participate or not? And so for our plastics project, it took place in Cuyahoga County, and it focused on water bottles, bags, and plastic cigar tips. Are people familiar with cigar tips? They go on the end of filterless cigarettes or cigarillos. They are one of the #1 items we find on our beach cleanups, and I also know they're a big problem for you here in Pennsylvania when I look at the beach cleanup data. you actually have a greater percentage for your cleanup profile than we do, so.
I think they're coming from you.
Probably, so congratulations on that. And so this was a grant that was funded by NOAA, the NOAA Marine Debris Program. They gave money to the Sustainability Office in the city of Cleveland, and they were going to do a marketing campaign, and so a marketing firm was hired for the project, and then they reached out to Sea Grant to do the social science research to help inform this marketing campaign. And so what we found for plastic bags is we found the reason people use them is because they forget to bring their reusable bags to the store. So they either forget them at home or in the car. So they have them, they just forget them, and then it's so easy to get them from the store because they're free, so they just take the bags from the store. So our next steps is how do we get people to bring their bags into the store? As far as water bottles, we found that, at least in our area, people don't have a place to refill their water bottle. And so they don't have a water refill station that they think the water is filtered and clean, and so then they have to revert to using bottled water when they're away from home. Because we found that most people will drink out of their faucet when they're at home, but as they move away from home, they switch to using bottled water more regularly. So what we're working on is with the city of Cleveland is where can we put in water refill stations, how can we make them attractive, how can we make people use them? And so that's something that the city of Cleveland water department is working on. And then lastly, for cigar tips, we found that the people using cigar tips are often smoking them illegally because they're under the age of 21. In Ohio, we just passed a law, you have to be 21 years or older to purchase tobacco products, so it's going to be very hard to reach this user audience. And so really, we just need to gather more information, and we need to identify with this audience on their terms. They don't respond to words like marine debris or anything like that. And so really, we have to approach them from their level. And so a researcher in Cleveland is working with that group. She worked with them to talk about the health issues with smoking tobacco. Now she's working with them to talk about how they discard of these materials and how they feel how that relates to the environment. So I'm just going to talk about plastic bags because that's the only project that Sea Grant is continuing to do more work on. So we received some more funding from the NOAA Marine Debris Program to pilot these reminder strategies in grocery stores. And so we're trying to switch people. The behavior we're changing is bringing your bag into the store instead of using the single-use plastic bags that are given to you. And so some of the reminder strategies we're going to pilot in grocery stores will be signs in the parking lot. There'll be little decals that you could put in your car, so as you're getting out of your car, it will remind you to grab your bag. We would do some work with the people at checkout, prompting people, asking them, do you have your own bags? Do you really need a bag? And then also doing some educational displays at the store talking about the benefits of using reusable over single use. And there are other places who do this. This is in North Carolina. I go to the Outer Banks every year, and one of the grocery stores has a little sign that says, do you have your reusable bags? And so trying to pilot something like that up here. And so trying to figure out if behavior change will change or not, we have to do a lot of data collection. And it's very hard because you have to talk to people, and people don't always want to talk to you. They often want to yell at you. So yeah, you have to have thick skin. So these are called intercept surveys. So we would just do a random selection. We would just talk to people as they're leaving or entering the grocery store to ask them, are they seeing the signs? Is it encouraging them to bring bags? What can we do to remind them to bring bags? Also, we would look at the stores and we would look at their bag use prior to the implementation of our project and then post-implementation of our project to see if we were successful at using less bags. And then we also want to ask grocery stores what happens to the bags that are taken to you, because nobody really knows. We assume they're going to recycling, but they may just be going to landfill, and so we need that information. And then also, we're going to do education about bringing your bags to the store to recycle, so will we increase recycling of bags with this project? So those are all things that we're going to hope to find out within the next year of this project. So we are facing some challenges with this project. Ohio is a little all over the place with these plastic bag bans or fees. So up in Cuyahoga County, Council proposed a levy on plastic bags, but then you have the state legislation saying it is illegal to do any fees or levies plastic bags. And so you kind of have the two different governments fighting against each other. So everything is halted right now and nobody's doing anything. One of our cities proposed a bag fee, but that again is not going anywhere. So right now, like I said, there's nothing going on. But grocery stores, they don't want to alienate their customers, and this is a very hot button issue. So getting their involvement in the project has been very challenging because they don't want to appear to be taking a side on the project. So we kind of started this project at a really bad time, but hopefully it will be successful. And if you want any more information about all the plastic bag legislation for the country, the Sea Grant Law Office put out this wonderful memo. So the next project I would like to talk about, and this is the one where Sue and I are working together, is an awareness initiative up at Put-in Bay. And so the reason we chose Put-in Bay is because that's where Stone Laboratory is housed. We're on a tiny little island called Gibraltar, and so we have a really great relationship with the island community, mostly because Sue knows everyone and just does a wonderful job of making connections on the island. And so the items we're focusing on are beverage bottles, tobacco materials, and then straws. And the reason we chose these three items is it is a party-driven atmosphere. People go there to have a good time, get some food, and so these items are commonly found on our cleanups up there, but they're also being used by a lot of the people and a lot of the restaurants use single-use beverage containers versus reusable beverage containers. And then smoking cigarettes are the #1 item found, and oddly enough, there's very little work done with the smoking community, even though they're the #1 item found on beach cleanup. So we're going to try and do some work with that community. And again, this program or project has been funded by the NOAA Marine Debris Program, and so Sea Grant and Stone Laboratory will be working on the project. And so just a little more information about Put-in Bay. There's about 750,000 tourists that come there every year, and about 650,000 of them go through the 2 ferry systems, and so they will be working with us on the project. And so it's really unique because we can pretty much reach everyone going to the island or coming off the island. The other people get there through recreational boating, so we've partnered with the Ohio Clean Marina Program, and we're going to reach the recreational boaters through that. So we're pretty much reaching everyone on the island, which is really exciting. Also, we've not tried this work in Ohio before, and to my knowledge, there's nobody else doing this work. Tourists are a really hard group of people to work with because they're on vacation, so it'll be a really cool pilot project. And our messaging is going to focus a little bit about the issues of plastics, but mostly about what you can do when you're on vacation or when you get home to use less of these plastics. So really focusing on a behavior change. And so we have great support. So like I said, all of the transportation partners on the island, the 2 ferries, the taxi services, and then a little tour, like educational tour train, they are all on board. We have the National Park is on board, the Lake Erie Islands Conservancy, which they run a few of the parks in the area, but they also, and then there's a nature center on board. Then, like I said, to reach our recreational boaters, the Clean Marina Program is on board, and then the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and the one yacht club that has said they'll work with us is the Put-in Bay Yacht Club. Because there are so many restaurants on the island, and we will be doing a Skip the Straw campaign, we're going to be working with the Boardwalk family of restaurants, and they pretty much own most of the restaurants that are at least on the coastal part of the island, and they've been great in the project. And then other island partners is we're going to be working with the Put-in Bay Township because they manage some of the land, and then also the Put-in Bay Township Park District because they do some of the cleanups in that area. And then lastly, we do have congressional support from Marcy Captor. She's in District 9, and so she has pledged her support to this project because she's very involved with the issue of marine debris. And really, we would not have had these partners without Sue and Stone Lab having such a great relationship with the businesses and the locals on the island. So we have to measure behavior change with several different ways, and because we are working with tourists, it's presented a big challenge, but we have lots of different ways to measure change, and so hopefully we'll be successful. So right now, Sue and I have been doing a lot of cleanups to figure out what the litter profile is, and then after we implement the project, we'll do more cleanups to see if we're finding less of our target items on the beach. We have done a lot of outreach with the restaurants. We will do a focus group with them to see how customers responded to not having straws come in their drinks. Were people pleased with it? Were people angry with them? And then also we're going to be finding out from restaurants how much money they've spent on purchasing straws since implementation of the Skip the Straw campaign. For our recreational boaters, we will be doing outreach with them, and then we will be doing some surveys to determine their response to this project and if they changed behavior when they went home. And then as far as tourists, this is going to be our greatest challenge. We have iPads that will be doing surveys as the people are leaving. It's about a 30-minute ferry ride, or sometimes they have to wait in line at the ferry terminal for a long period of time. We will do a survey with them and then ask them to give us their email so we could survey them a couple months down the road to see if their behavior changed after they went home. And then also, we have a visitor center, and the idea is people would fill out a postcard to write to themselves, and we would send it to their house with the online link to take a survey a couple months after they left the island to see if they changed behavior when they went home. And so for project challenges, the island is cut off to us for about half of the year just because of the weather. Also, we've had really high water levels, and so the ferries can't run if the water's too rough. And so we've already run into this a couple of times trying to do beach cleanups. We can't get there, and we don't live on the island, so it's going to be a struggle. Also, like I said, people are on vacation. They want to have a good time. They don't want to focus on sad things like trash. So how are we going to engage them is going to be a challenge. And then the island actually does shut down for about 6 months. So all the businesses, they're no longer there. And so half of our partner, actually pretty much most of our partners, will be somewhere else for 6 months out of the year. So we have a very small window of time to do our work in. And then there's lots of single-use plastics used on the island. And so that's just the habit. And so changing this habit, getting restaurants to switch to reusables is going to be a big challenge. But like I said, they're on board and they've actually moved forward with the Skip the Straw campaign just with us suggesting it. We didn't even have the grant yet, and they were just all gung-ho and they went forward with it. So that was really exciting.
Part of the problem that we face that I think adds to it is there's very little recycling on the island because of the cost to get it off. So if you sit and talk to our restaurant owners who are basically selling beer in bottles, they have to smash down the bottles, put them in a pickle bucket, put it in the landfill dumpster, but they know that it's still going to the landfill. So about the only thing that's efficiently recycled at Put-in Bay is cardboard. That's it. So recycling is also an issue here. So we're looking at people that we're working with that are struggling with how also to get their trash off the island efficiently and not having it end up like this.
And then habits are difficult to change, and so as we've been working with the wait staff, it's just habit for them to put straws in drinks, and so we really have to retrain them. Also, I've been training myself to say no straw. I don't always do that, and sometimes I do, and there's still a straw. And so it's just going to be a challenge, but we're willing to take it on. And then as Sue mentioned, yeah, recycling on the island is pretty much non-existent, and so that's just another challenge that our businesses are facing. And throughout this process, we want to be very careful that we don't alienate any of the businesses' customers, because they pretty much have to make their profit within 4 or 5 months. And so their focus is making their profit, and we're adding other things, but so far they've been super supportive and involved with this project from the beginning, and they're very happy we got the grant. We are also using several methods to address behavior change, so we can try and hit people at all the different times that they're on the island, because making sure this project is effective is really important. And then, that's all I was going to say.
One of the challenges that I believe that we didn't really address here is we as island people, like call us, our restaurants, our transportation, most of these people are vested in this island. They love it. It's their home. They have a personal commitment and passion for this island. And so when we address this with them, everybody's on board. Marcy Captor, who we said is our Congressional District 9 representative, is all over this. And she's instrumental in some other projects that we're running as well. The thing that we're finding is the tourists don't have that passion. They don't have the same passion for the island. They're there usually to come over for the day, to see what they can do, either to party or to bring their families. There's a lot of roadblocks with these people that don't have the passion that we do. And so we're working to find that medium. We know that we can't make all of the changes that we need to be, but if we influence some behavioral changes for people to then start to embrace that love that we have for our island, I see that beyond just the marine debris, because that island to us is very important.
And so we're happy to take any questions, or if you need to reach out to us, it's kind of there. It's just our last names .2 or sue.42@osu.edu. And then we put out a needs assessment report that goes in depth about the project we did in Cleveland. Our work was published in the Marine Pollution Bulletin for the bags and water bottles, and actually we just had our TIB research published last week, I think. And then there's the plastic bag ban memo. So if you need any of that information, you can either get it off this slide or I'm happy to send it to you.
The Ohio Sea Grant website also talks about this initiative. They just released a release about that as well. Normally I have snakes in my pocket. I did bring any today, so you're safe.
And this presentation will be included on the Pennsylvania Sea Grant website afterwards, so you can get your information.
I have been reading, it is not recycling hitting a brick wall, in that there's so many of the recyclers are going out of business because there's no money in it. So how is that going to affect your projects?
So that's a great question. Yes, recycling pretty much in the whole world, but really in the US has completely collapsed ever since Asia stopped taking all of our recyclable materials. And so we really only ever recycled about 10% of what could be recycled. As far as our project on Put-in Bay, it won't affect us too much because we're not saying recycling is the answer to the problem. We're saying stopping using these plastics is the answer to the problem. It does affect us though for our plastic bag work because these stores may no longer take the plastic bags if they won't be recycled, or they may take them, say they're going to recycling when they're actually sending them to landfill. It's kind of like a marketing strategy. They say they're being green, but they're really not. And so, but that's a great question. So sadly, recycling, there's just no market for those products right now.
When you talk to store owners and chain stores, is there any thought that they're giving you about possibly going back to paper bags?
So that's another great question. So paper bags are actually more environmentally costly in the production phase. They require more fossil fuels to create them, and they're also heavier. So when they're transported, there's more fossil fuels released in the transportation process. However, if they do find themselves in the natural environment, they will biodegrade much quicker because they are just a paper product. Whereas plastic is much cheaper and uses less petroleum to make when it's created, but when it gets in the natural environment, we know all of the harmful things that come of that. So really, we are not asking them to go to paper. We are saying, bring your reusable. That's really the best option.
So what you're saying is we've been a rock and a hard place.
Exactly. Just bring your bags from home. That's really the best situation, and that's the behavior we're working towards.
Always been doing it for years. You buy your bags, you carry your groceries, keep you in the car and bring them in. Simple thing. We came from Maryland in 2012. Maryland had a law that said, if you want a plastic bag, I'm not talking about those groceries. Macy's had a buy your bag to take your stuff home in the box with your car.
That's California as well. I have a daughter in California, and it's exactly the same
I
process.
don't understand how that can't be done here.
So that's, yeah, so other countries have been charging you for plastic bags forever, or they just don't offer them. Like if you ever shop bulk, you will never see any bags available. They'll give you produce boxes, or if you just put everything directly into your car. The reason it's such a challenge for us in the United States is the plastic bags industry has a lobbyist group, and their name is escaping me right now, but they have lots of money that fights the legislation that comes up for either bag fees or bag bans. And that's what we faced in Ohio, is they were the ones funding what they're called preemption laws, making it illegal to put fees or ban on single-use plastic items. And bags are the poster child for the bans and fees right now. But there are places being successful. California has been successful. Seattle just banned straws. So there are places being successful, but they're all local grassroots organizations that are doing the work. It's not coming from the state or federal government.
So in the 30 seconds that we have left in this particular session. Okay, thank you for sharing with us. And I noticed, I think I counted, you had 13 partners on there. And I think that's a critical piece to a successful project. So NOAA's Marine Debris Program has an outreach opportunity that is typically released in August. I would like to invite people who are interested in collaborating on a proposal for this next round to get in touch with me. I would be happy to start that conversation. Typically, awards run from $75,000 to $125,000. They run a year or two. They require a one-to-one non-federal match. They ask you to engage stakeholders and target audiences, and they want some real outcomes, like you were saying. They want to see what the impact of that project is. But we have several months to work on a project like that, and Marlene Marks with Pennsylvania Sea Grant, if you're interested, get in touch with me and we can start that conversation. Thank you.